We'll get started. I know for you, you were diagnosed a couple years ago, right? 4 years ago?
Yeah, I was diagnosed when I was 24. It was, I had like an anxiety attack and I went into a psychiatrist in like April of 2018 and I got diagnosed with anxiety and depression and then later ADHD. And then I had my last semester of undergrad. So I kind of got to experience like my bachelor's degree with having ADHD and not even knowing I had ADHD and not being diagnosed. And then that last semester, like it was night and day with the effort I put into school. It was crazy.
Interesting. So how did the diagnosis come about? Was it just you had a particularly well-read medical provider, or was it your own research or?
Actually, so I was getting my degree in biomedical science and chemistry. And I remember I would just get so frustrated with myself when I would be like sitting in organic chemistry and my professor would be like, all right, so I have something really important to share with everybody. Please pay attention. If you don't pay attention to anything else this whole hour, please pay attention to what I'm about to say. And I'm like, all right, I got this. I'm focused. I got this. What do you got to say? And then I would like look at the periodic table and I'd be like, what kind of words can I make out of all those letters? And then I would hear her say again, okay, you got it. I'm not repeating that. And I'm like, oh my God. And that happened so often. And it's not that I was zoning out because I wasn't interested. Like I wanted to know, but my brain was like, no, we're going to do something that's unimportant. So I remember talking with a friend about it and she was like, you should go get tested. I got tested. I take medication now and it has changed my life. And I'm like, I don't know. We'll see. I hate going to the doctors. I hate scheduling appointments. So I put it off. And then finally I had a really big panic attack when I was studying for a cell and molecular biology class exam. And I was like, okay, I need help. I couldn't breathe. I was panicking. So I went to go see this psychiatrist and he's like, you for sure have anxiety. It sounds like you have a touch of depression too. And then my psychiatrist that I went to, didn't believe in ADHD. Like he was like, I don't think it's a real thing. And he's like, so I'll just diagnose you with these two. You can get antidepressants for now and blah, 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 blah. The antidepressants helped my focus a little bit. But then when I went back for my checkup, I'm like, listen, I know you don't believe in it, but I would really like to explore it because I've done the research, I've hyper focused on what it means to be ADHD, how it affects you. Like it fits me to a T. And he's like, all right, fine, here. So he gave me the drugs and I tried them and it was life changing. So then now I see a different doctor who listens to me more. She adjusts my dosage and she actually believes that ADHD is real because she has, friends and family that have it too. So that was a
And
really
also it's
long-winded way
real.
of saying that. Long-winded explanation of, yeah, my first doctor wasn't that great, but now I have one that's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, did you feel like you related to the hyperactivity part? Because I know from my personal experience that my therapist was diagnosed with ADHD through her son several years ago. And so she kept gently suggesting to me, I should really look into it. I should really look into it. And I just dismissed her. I was sort of like, I don't know, maybe, but like, I don't relate to the hyperactivity part. I was like, I can spend days in a comatose state on the couch. Like I am definitely did not think of myself as a hyperactive person. And even when I took the self-test online, this was all prior to the pandemic. Like I took the self-test from Adhd magazine online for women and I scored like a perfect score, almost perfect.
Perfect.
Right. The first time I aced a test.
Right.
And still like felt really resistant because of the way in which ADHD is so terribly misrepresented, right? And so I was like, well, this, even though I relate to the self-test, I still didn't feel like it was me until I started like really doing the deep dive hyper focus into like lived experiences with other people, especially women. So I'm curious, like, did you feel like you had did you relate? What was my initial question? I think it was, did you relate to the hyperactivity part?
Yes. So very much so. Like that was very obvious when I was a kid. I got in trouble a lot. My mom would always make comments like how I was acting like a boy because I was always running around and interrupting people. I would pull my card like almost every day in class, you have one strike against you, you interrupt your teacher, you go under the desk during silent reading time and tie your classmates' shoelaces to their desk legs. Not that I did that or anything, but I got in trouble a lot for hyperactivity. It's gotten a little better as an adult, but now it kind of manifests as like really aggressive driving and impatience and impulsivity. And during Zoom talks, I noticed that mine's the only square that's like constantly moving. So yes, very much. I'm very much combined, like almost equally with inattentive and hyperactive.
Yeah, that took a lot. I mean, that was also mind blowing for me, thinking about all of the ways in which my hyperactivity um, manifests itself, right? That I had never attributed to hyperactivity, like being really quick to rage, the emotional regulation issue,
Right.
road rage, standing in line, impulsivity, like all of that falls under the H. But I think so many of us think of little boys who can't sit
Exactly.
still and dismiss it all. But like I have yet to interview a woman for this podcast who didn't have the hyperactivity element, just in the way she thought and got excitable and like the talking part and then apologizing for rambling and all of that. Like I'm
Right.
like, girl,
Yes.
you are hyperactive, please.
Yep.
uh,
Exactly.
yeah. All right, so now let's look back at once you were diagnosed. I mean, you were also going through a lot in your life at that point, because you would have already had like a 1-year-old, right? Or how old was your son?
Yeah, he would have
And you're in
been,
and
I
you're
guess
in
he would have been
college.
2. So he was born in March 2016. And I was diagnosed in June 2018. So he was 2 years old and I was one semester away from graduating. So what was the question?
Just you had a lot on your plate, like
Yes, for sure.
right. So and I think back, like there were so many times in my own life, I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety from high school on, and was on a various cocktail of antidepressants, and then I had postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety, and now it's like now it's basically perimenopause, the giant question mark of hormones all the
Ugh,
time following me
can't
everywhere
wait.
I go. um so and I just anytime I think about a woman who has like a child under the age of 3 or 4, I just want to give her a hug, because like I remember how horrible, or just how it wasn't horrible, it was lovely, but it was just so difficult,
It was a
and
lot. It was a lot.
it is a lot. And I can't, I mean, part of me thinks like, would an ADHD diagnosis have helped during that time? Yes, absolutely. But at the same time, like, what do you do with that information when you still aren't getting, aren't sleeping at night, or, like
Sure.
when you have that level, when you're just, your cup is like always full, and you're just getting jostled over and over and over again and overflowing everywhere. Um, all right, let me get back to again. I initially was asking the question of like looking back at your life. You talked a little bit about being a kid. What are some of the things in your past where you think, oh my God, the signs were there all along? How did nobody see this?
So something I've seen and heard and read a lot about on social media when I put my tweets out there and stuff, is everyone can relate to when I talk about how my teachers would always be like, Sydney has great potential, but she doesn't listen. She talks a lot. Her desk is unorganized. Like that in itself, like my mother should have been like, okay, let's, instead of exploring that, she was more of a, she was very much a disciplinary person. So I would get in trouble if my teacher called and said, Sydney's desk is unorganized, or she forgot her homework again, or she didn't do her homework. Like, so it was stuff like that, that when I look back, it kind of makes me angry, that she didn't, because my dad was like, my parents were married when I was a little kid, but my dad was in the Army, and I'm pretty sure I got my ADHD from him. So my dad wasn't really home a lot, but so my mom was in charge of all the discipline stuff. So first of all of that, everything the teacher would say about, I have potential, but, and then how at home I would get really, really angry. And still looking back on like when I got older, like when I was a teenager, the emotional dysregulation aspect of it, like I would just get really into my feelings when I was angry about something that I didn't need to be that angry about. But that all just kind of like built up and up and up. And then finally it was like I told you, when I was sitting in chemistry class and I'm just staring off into space when I really wanted to be in there and paying attention. So just like a lifetime of frustrations, basically, but it
Mm.
started as long as I can remember.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I have a really hard time. I obviously my parents did what they could, and so I don't have a lot of anger toward them, but there are moments where I'm just like, why did nobody get me a fucking tutor? Like, like how, like I had, because for me, like I had the same experience, which was just like my grades went off a cliff around middle school. And so whether that's hormones, whether that was structure and independence or, expectations, all of the above, I don't know, but I just sort of felt like my mother took the she took the point of view, which is like, well, not everybody can be a straight A student, and that's fine. And she really wanted me to feel like I was still had worth without getting the grades. But like, no, but there was a part of me that even then felt like I had an undiagnosed learning disorder, and yet still, I never thought like maybe I should have some help or a tutor. Like it was like, why did it not occur to anybody that I could have had some help, and that's one of the things I really grapple with now, which is like, as a parent, what am I not seeing with my kids, that we're all
Yeah,
like in 30 years, they're going to look back and be like, how did you allow this to happen? And me being like, I don't know, I miss a lot. There's a lot of stuff I tend to miss.
yeah, I feel like, oh, my camera went out, but can you hear me
I can
still?
still hear you.
Okay. Um, I feel like I've become very hyper vigilant with my son. My camera actually, hang on one second. My camera was doing this a lot during my streams also, and now it won't start. Is that okay if I can just talk like this?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, cool. Um, I feel like I've become very hyper vigilant as a parent with ADHD, and I see a lot of signs. I don't want to just be quick to diagnose my son, of course. He's only 5, but you know, I I'm more patient with him, I feel like, than my mother was patient with me. So
Mm.
I'm trying my best when it comes to parenting and looking out and, encouraging instead of disciplining for behaviors that might be related to, like a neurodevelopmental or a neurological disorder.
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, my mom has passed away before I was even diagnosed, because I feel like there's so much I want to go back and talk to her about. What's it like talking to your parents about your diagnosis? Did they feel like, oh yeah, that makes sense?
Well, my dad, he lives over in the Netherlands. He'll actually be here this weekend, but I've sent him a few things like, hey, I'm pretty sure you're ADHD because I have ADHD. And he's like, and he started to kind of suspect it a little bit. He's in his early 50s. I don't talk to my mom anymore. She walked out of my life like 4 years ago. So there was always kind of turbulence there. And just one thing led to another with her new husband, and we're not on speaking terms anymore.
Gotcha. Yeah, I feel like I have managed, I feel like I'm slowly converting a bunch of people
Yeah.
uh, through my own openness. And it's interesting too, because I feel like, I'm sure you'll relate to this. Like there's this sense of advocacy that a lot of us experience around ADHD, this feeling of like, if I can save one person from going through the experience that I went through, it will have made it all worth it, right? Which like,
Exactly. That's exactly why I started doing what I'm doing. Like I remember that feeling of realizing this is what I have. This is me. I like it was just an amazing discovery. And I felt like, I have ADHD. Like sometimes it is a struggle, but it was just nice to know, to understand why I was the way that I was. And I did the things I did. And I want to make other people feel that way as much as I can. Like I want to give that to anybody that I can that has ADHD.
Mhm. I know, same, right? And I feel like it is so misunderstood, especially by medical professionals. And I'll probably get flack for this, but like, I had a really great experience with my diagnosis. I can't believe some of the nightmare stories I have heard from some women who are negated by medical professionals, or even your
Mm-hmm.
experience. I don't believe it is, or people outgrow it, or like all of this, like outdated information. And then, I think about how many women have read the literature, have felt more seen by ADHD than they felt by anything else in their life, and then go to a doctor and have the experience where the doctor's like, nah, I think it's just depression, or you're just a
Right. Or
mom, or oh,
hormones.
right, exactly, like, no, it's just, quit complaining and just get your act together.
Exactly. Hmm.
And again, so I feel like it's so important to kind of disseminate this information, but also, widen the net to a degree in terms of like our shared experiences and our shared stories, and being like, yeah, actually road rage has to do with ADHD, and impulsive shopping has to do with ADHD, and
Yes.
anxiety and rumination over conversations is ADHD, like all of these things that fall under the umbrella that people don't understand or realize, and they're certainly not going to get from, medical texts or studies.
Hmm.
So
Exactly.
yeah.
That's why I really like, how many people are doing what me and you are doing, because, you read all these medical studies. I'm very big into, like, I love reading about science. But when you read about ADHD, they're like, from a cohort of 12 9-year-old boys from New Hampshire. It's like, okay, can we talk about, the single mother, the the teenage girl, like, not just these little boys that have it. So like when you read about ADHD, it's very specific to these little boys. And that's why I like, putting out the surveys that I put out on Twitter, because I'm including everybody. I'm including the trans and non-binary communities. I'm not just looking at a small cohort of 9-year-old to 10-year-old boys that have ADHD. So I like doing this because it lets other people see what everyone's experiences. And I like to stress that everyone's experience with ADHD is going to be different. But it's nice to see that, someone out there you're going to relate to. They may not relate to the medical literature, but they may relate to this other person that's talking about their experience. And that is so important to me.
Mhm. Yeah, I interviewed Danielle Mitov, who is a scientist, and she said something really interesting that I hadn't thought about, which is like the difference between the scientist brain and the medical professional brain, where she was like, scientists are looking for answers, right? They are seekers. They're always, their MO is always like, but why? But why is this happening? What is
Yes.
the source? But why?
Yes.
And she was like, a medical professional is like interested in like, what is the quickest way to fix this?
Right. Exactly.
And how do we make this go away? And so I think about that all the time now, in terms of that, like, who is the person that we are seeking help from? Are they a person who is willing to kind of go down those rabbit holes and figure out
Hmm.
like, why is this happening, and really kind of listen to these symptoms and wanting to solve the puzzle along with us? Or are they somebody who's like, how can we make this go away as fast as possible? I
Okay, this is going to be a side note, but it might be relevant. So I'm kind of dealing with something similar, but with reproductive health. So um, I'm not sure if you knew, but this past year I've had 2 miscarriages. And I am pretty sure, since the age of 14, when I started menstruating, I have known that I've had endometriosis, and my mother had this. And, every month I'm in pain, and it's gotten worse since my miscarriages. Like, I'm in excruciating, severe pain. Um, and I've told doctors this my whole life. I'm like, I think I have endometriosis. It hurts. It hurts. And every single doctor is like, no, it's probably just period cramps. Like, they don't look for it, they don't test for it. And I'm finding that that's just seems to be the medical field. Like, no hate on doctors, like there are some really great ones out there, but sometimes doctors will look at women specifically and be like, yeah, no, I think you're just, exaggerating a little bit. You're going to be fine. So I have had to schedule appointments with specialists, and my appointment that's scheduled for my endometriosis consultation to try to get a laparoscopy and surgery and get it all out of there is in April 26th. It is August right now. Like, that is how hard it is to get heard by a doctor when you're a woman.
Oh, yeah. Well, and then you think about the ADHD element too, in terms of the amount of barriers that we experience, even just making the appointments,
Yes.
like making the phone calls, and like the executive function that is required, and like
Hmm.
remembering to follow up and to advocate for yourself, and to put your symptoms, even being able to articulate symptoms into words, and then remembering in the moment what those are. Like, it just feels like there are so many overwhelming barriers to getting help. And the irony is not lost on any of us in terms of like, when you have ADHD, you know, how it just, the system has set it up so that it is virtually impossible.
Yes, and not just the making appointments, but like remembering to fill your prescriptions if you're on medication. Like it's ironic, you know, like everything that's required to get yourself diagnosed and continue to treat yourself is a struggle daily.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and I mean, I feel like I should backpedal and say I'm not anti-medical professional by any means. They have certainly serve a purpose, but I think it's an interesting kind of way to think about like the different brains and how they approach problems.
Oh yeah.
And like it should be a red flag if you were in a doctor's office and you were explaining something and the doctor is just like, no, I don't think that's it. That should be a red flag in itself, right?
Yes.
As opposed to
Yes.
like, tell me more. Why do you feel this way? You know, like I feel like we are so quickly lose that sense of empowerment when we're sitting in a doctor's office. And it's really when, you know, in the moment right now, when I'm thinking about it, I'm not in a doctor's office. I'm like, God, these are all these things that we should be doing. When I'm sitting in a doctor's office, I'm like, I'm totally tongue tied and like, okay, whatever you want. Oh, you're ushering me out now. Okay, goodbye. Like, you know, like it's just all of it. It just feels tragic to me sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, I have had I have had nurse practitioners who have been fantastic in terms of like, you know, listening and really like, I think you can have that questioning mindset and still be a medical professional.
Oh
I don't want to
yeah.
say it's like a sweeping generalization, but I do feel like I feel so upset at how many stories I have heard about women who have been basically told, no, I think you're wrong. Sorry. I think it's X, Y. And you're like, wow, I have just, you know, the more I read and the more I research, like you said, like the more I know this is what it is. Like I feel it in my bones. And I think we're just kind of taught over time to stop listening to that intuitive voice.
Yeah, exactly. Because I was just about to say, you know, where it's devastating, you know, you put that much effort into learning about something that you think that you have, you know, you read everything that you can, you spend hours and hours, you know, making lists and being like, okay, maybe this is what I have. And you just want answers. And you make the phone call, which is really hard for us to do. You go in and sit in the waiting room, which is hard for us to do, and you sit there and you open up and tell a stranger about things and you feel like you're complaining, but you're trying to get answers. And then when they say, yeah, no, probably not, like that, just it kills like the momentum. And like you said, it just ruins any future, you know, hope of you actually advocating for yourself. And I just really want to be able to encourage women, especially, to continue to try to advocate for themselves. And I think that what you're doing is going to definitely help with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's, I think, well, you too. I mean, this seems like a good segue to talk about what in the ADHD and your videos and what you started, because it hasn't been that long, right? It's only been basically since the
Since
end of
about the
last year.
beginning ish of the year, I really started getting a little. I made the account in December, but I became more active in January. It started really picking up steam in May. And after I had my miscarriages, I was like, all right, I am not going to be able to defend, because I'm currently a master's student. I'm supposed to defend my thesis in microbiology and genetics. It was supposed to be on July 21st. But my second miscarriage was on my birthday on July 7th. And I'm like, all right, I need a break. And I'm realizing that working helps. And I love doing this as work. So I, you know, put something out there. I'm like, if anybody wants to help me with, you know, I love making videos. I really love science. So all my videos and all my blog posts and everything is based on science. I explain it in a simple way. I have teaching experience from when I was a TA. So I feel like I have strength in explaining kind of complex ideas in a way for anyone to understand. And I can't do this by myself. Like it's so difficult. Like, you know, you record, you have to edit, you have to go through and, you know, put in like long descriptions for things, you have to write blog posts. Like it takes a while. Like recording and editing a video or podcast, like it could take hours and hours. so I needed help, and I put a couple of tweets out there, and now I have like a whole mini team of people that, like, I have a personal assistant who helps me with things, and I have a graphic designer, and we have like a new data guy who runs statistical analyses on all my surveys. But together we're all just working to normalize discussion about ADHD and ADHD comorbidities and symptoms that maybe people didn't know about. But then I also like to sprinkle in fun things every once in a while, like, tell me what it's like having ADHD, but using only GIFs, stuff like that. So I like to sprinkle in, kind of different aspects at first that anyone could enjoy. Hopefully, hopefully people can find one thing they like about what we do. And hopefully that can help them, open up to a medical professional about getting diagnosed. I've actually had lots of people send me a message privately and say, thank you so much for doing what you do. I'm going in. I called, I made the appointment. I'm going in to get my diagnosis today. Thank you so much. Like, that means so much to me. And that's why I continue to do what I do and talk about the science and normalize it and be goofy all together.
Yeah. I know that reminds me, I've had a couple, I've interviewed quite a few women now since my podcast has been out for a while who were listeners of the podcast who kind of talk about how their own understanding of their own ADHD through listening to the podcast, which has been nice. But I've had like two guests who actually like realized they had ADHD through me.
Huh.
And
And it's amazing,
it
right?
is. I feel like I'm like the ADHD midwife, where just like it is amazing because it really feels like, yeah, like I said, like it feels so good to help others. I do sometimes get overwhelmed by people reaching out and wanting a lot from me
Oh,
in
I
terms of
agree. Like,
like that, getting the same questions over and over again. So I'm like trying
yes.
to automate, like, where do I put the resources so that I can just send people to this one place instead of cutting and pasting the same messages over and over again. Um, or then sometimes I'm like, ugh, somebody emailed me and it fell through the cracks and then I forgot to email them back and then I felt terrible about it. Like, I'm like, there's all of these other side elements that I'm struggling with.
Oh yeah, I agree. Like, you want to help people, you gain popularity, but then the problem is you also have ADHD. So keeping up with emails, keeping up with messages and requests to come on and talk about stuff, like, it can be overwhelming. And that's definitely where my personal assistant comes in handy. Like, she does all of that for me. And I feel better now, because I would feel terrible, like you said, about seeing that I had a message request from 4 weeks ago. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah, even I think asking for help is a topic that I've spoken with a lot of guests about, how hard it is for us to ask for help and how important it is to get help. How
Yes.
I think that was an early realization for me, like how I really should not expect to be doing everything on my own. And like, why do we assume we can do everything on our own? I mean, I think it's for a lot of reasons, but I think for the most part, like, it's really difficult to stop yourself, especially if you're in the middle of a hyper focus, to sort of stop and then articulate and think about, okay, so what do I need help with? What can I do by myself? How do I balance the help I do get? And then how do I ask them for the help? How do I even articulate the help to the other person? And then what happens if they do it wrong? Then I have to deal with the like
Mm-hmm.
RSD of correcting
Mm-hmm.
them and then worrying about their feeling. Like, like,
Yes.
there are so many ways in which it's easier to be like, you know what, I'm just going to do it myself and I'll stay up for 24 hours straight.
Yes.
Or,
And I feel like you said about the hyperfocus, like, something I have had to really work on, I'm still working on it, is, stopping myself, being like, okay, recognizing when I'm hyper focusing on something and really asking myself, okay, why am I doing this exact task right now? Is there an easier way to do it? Like, can I break it up? Like, I need to start getting better at doing that, because sometimes I will spend like 8 hours sitting in the same position working on the same thing, because if I get up, it'll distract me, and I know that, so I just sit here. But I need
mm,
to get better at it, because it's unhealthy. I've started getting really bad nerve pain because I sit in hyperfocus for such a long time.
yeah. No, I hear you. And then I think about like I love your graphic elements. I love the humor in your videos, especially. I love the fact that you think to add in like bloopers in your video, or just, I don't know, the way that you edit your videos is very refreshing and very amusing, and I really appreciate it. So I want to make
Yeah, I
sure.
try not to be I try not to be, there's a lot of ADHD advocates out there, which I don't want to diss them or anything. Like, I appreciate every single one of them. It's a hard job to do. But I try not to be too toxically positive, if that makes sense. Like, I try not to be like, ADHD is your superpower. We can do it. It makes me amazing. Like, that's like, yeah, there are some good aspects, but let's talk about like the struggles, and let's talk about what's happening inside of our brain that makes it that way and what we can do to combat it and cope with it. Like I try to stay away from too much of the, positivity stuff, if that makes me sound terribly negative, but
No, absolutely. I'm the same way. I feel like, I think there are ways in which we credit, and I certainly credit my ADHD for most of the great things I've done in my life.
hmm hmm
um, but at the same time, yeah, like I don't feel like it serves anybody to ignore what life, and especially a life undiagnosed, can be, like
oh
how
yeah,
many struggles we have faced.
for sure.
And even when you do know about your ADHD, even when you are diagnosed, there's a whole host of other issues. And it doesn't serve anybody to focus entirely on the superpower element, just like it doesn't serve you to only talk about how it's a disorder or a disability and talk about
Right.
it like it's a terminal illness, because
hmm
I don't think that serves us either. So yeah, it feels like it's incredibly nuanced, and needs, a much, what's the word I'm looking for, a myopic, less myopic look. I don't know what I'm trying to say. A well-rounded, I'm making like a circular
like a full
motion,
picture,
right?
the
Yes, the whole
full,
picture.
yes, the something. I have problems. I will like, if I can't figure out how I want to word something, I will spend about 30 minutes on Google, like, what's another way to say, and then I type it in, and then I'm like looking at the origins of all these words and phrases, and then I realize I'm like, wait, what am I doing? I need to go back and
Oh, I
finish this
know.
email.
I know. The thesaurus is my best friend.
Yes, that is my favorite thing in the world.
Yeah, right. So, speaking of ADHD. Oh, that was what my point when I was talking about your graphics and like the fun of your videos and the pun of your name and everything. Like I love that, and I also kind of assume that all came from your brain, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
like,
Yes.
so I love when I come upon somebody and I just see like all the different creative elements where you're like, I am a scientist, but I also like am a whiz at graphic design. And you're like,
Yeah,
yeah, that
because
makes
hyper
total
focus
sense.
on hobbies. I'm like, I'm kind of good at a lot of things, but I'm not really good at anything.
Right, exactly. I know that's my new approach to feeling good about hobbies, and the fact that I never finish anything is that like my favorite
Yeah.
hobby is trying new things. And I refuse
Yeah.
to get angry at myself because I don't finish anything. I'm just like, no,
That's a good
that's
way to
not
look at it.
right. I'm just like, no, my hobby is like flitting from one thing to another and discovering new things with childlike enthusiasm, and then dropping them when they get boring. And that's fine. Like, I think,
Precisely.
right? Like, I think a lot of my own journey with ADHD has been kind of changing that narrative, changing that the way we define ourselves, and changing, like, having a sense of humor about some of those struggles that we are going through, and also like
hmm
feeling like, yeah, it's really not the end of the world if your house is dirty. Like, it. Are you doing things because you need to do them and you feel like you should do them and you feel like you'll be judged by society if you don't do them, or are you doing them
Yes.
because they suit you and you found the motivation and you found the reason, and we really need good reasons to do things. It
Yes.
doesn't work well if we feel like we should do things. And so, cleaning your house is important, but again, it's all about like figuring out, taking away the kind of moral charge of like, I am a bad person because I don't do X or Y.
And this is a whole rant that I could go on for days, but the whole aspect of when we think of something, when we think of something that we do, or one of our behaviors, as bad or lazy, like, that is because that's how society labels us, not because that's what we are. We just require different materials and things to actually be able to function at the same level as neurotypicals in our society. And our society is kind of like, they have made us believe throughout our lives that we are lazy, and when we when we want to do something, but we literally cannot. It's like, oh, well, you must not, care enough. We do. It's just there's that executive dysfunction. And yes, like I said, a whole rant, but I agree that, relabeling some of the things that you do, not in a toxically positive way, but not in the toxically negative way that came from society either.
Right. Yeah. And then, most of our childhood being told like we weren't reaching our potential and,
Yeah, yes,
and being
exactly.
told there was something wrong with us or fix it or just do it or all of these things that made us sort of constantly internalize this sense of like, I'm doing it wrong. I don't know what's wrong, but I need to fix it, and all of these
Hmm.
ways that we've taken it on ourselves over the years.
Right.
So what would you say you love most about your ADHD?
I I like that I'm fun. I'm a fun mom. I actually just posted a video on Twitter this morning. I was in the drop off line with my son, and I like the hyperactive element comes into play when I'm trying to make my son smile, and I was like singing the "I'm a Gummy Bear" song and the Peanut Butter Jelly Time song, and he's just sitting there like, "Mama." I don't know, like, and I come up with fun things for us to do. I'm always up for things that he asks about. Like last night we were eating Nutella and pretzels, and he was like, "Are pretzels made out of bread?" And I'm like, "That is a great question." And then we watched YouTube videos on how like sandwich crackers are made, and how they push the steam out through the holes in the cracker, and like we learn a lot of things together because he's curious, and instead of me answering his why questions with because, I answer them with, "That's a great question. I don't know. Let's find out." Like, and I feel like that has a lot to do with my ADHD because, I'm always like a scientist. I feel like ADHD brains are kind of like scientists. We want to know why we have to Google things. We have to search for things. We have to learn about them. And I feel like that part of my ADHD makes me a fun, decent mother to my son.
And you absolutely can't go to bed until you get the answer.
Exactly. Yeah, we were up until like 10:30 last night. My husband's like, "He has school tomorrow," and I'm like, "Okay, sorry, let's go
No, no,
night."
no. You're right. It's like I can't watch a show without IMDb on, like in the background because I'm
Yes.
like, I know that guy from somewhere. Where do I know that guy from? And I have to know, and like I can't concentrate on the show until I figured it all out.
Oh,
And but it's true. That's a great point. Like I think it is the science mind, but I think a lot of us with ADHD have that science mind, that mindset of like, I always joke about like you'll ask somebody what their favorite color is, and somebody will say green. You ask somebody with ADHD what their favorite color is, and they'll be like, I don't know. I think it's green, but why do I like green? What is it about green? Which green do I like? What even is green?
it was purple last week. Why did it change? Like what happened in
What
my
does it
life?
what does it say about me that I like this color? Yeah. So but yeah, it's a good point with parenting because I feel like one of my favorite things to do as a parent is to say, let's Google that, right? Like if
Yeah,
they don't know
exactly.
anything, I get excited because it's a chance for us both to learn. And like even doing projects, like I remember my daughter had to do a huge project in the third grade on Singapore, and it was like the first experience I had had as a parent on like how much fun it is to do these projects now as a parent as opposed to be how miserable they were as a student.
Right, right.
But just being like, holy crap, I learned so much about this random information. Those are my favorite books too, are random fact books.
Yes, we last random funny side story. The other night he wanted to read a book that my grandmother got him. She's from Arizona, about Gila monsters. And he's like, "I want to read this book." I'm like, "Okay." So it's right before bedtime. We're getting all snuggly. And it was one of those fun fact books. And I'm like, "Okay, which part do you want to read about?" And he's like, "I want to read about their meals, like what they eat." I'm like, "Okay." So I flip to that page, and it starts out nice, but then it gets to, "The Gila monster penetrates its victims with its fangs as the poison slowly seeps into it and paralyzes it." And I'm like, "Oh my God, this is terrible." He's like, "No, Mama, keep reading. I want to know." So yeah, like a lot of those fun fact things, like I don't know, I wouldn't have known anything about Betelgeuse, the giant star, or black holes because my son asked questions, and I'm like, "Let's learn about it."
Mhm.
So that makes me, I'm learning more, and I feel like I'm a fun, teaching parent with my son, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, I find that as I age too, and I guess this is also an estrogen memory perimenopause thing, but like 90% of the time, I don't retain any of that information either, which is a little frustrating. Like my mind is like a sieve now.
Yeah.
And I'm still fascinated by all of those facts, but like I can't hold on to anything the way I used to.
Yeah, I could see that. And random side facts. I plan on doing a video about this at some point, because I've learned a lot about after my miscarriages. I've learned a lot about hormones and like progesterone and estrogen and estradiol or estradiol, one of those two. And estrogen actually has a lot to do with how our ADHD affects us, with the estrogen receptors in your brain, and how they fluctuate different times of the month. Like different levels of estrogen can definitely, exacerbate your ADHD symptoms. And I want to do a whole video and blog on it at some point. So look
Oh,
out for that.
I will. It is something that I get really invested and really interested in. And then I kind of hit a wall where I'm like, oh my God, it's too overwhelming. Nobody has any answers. There's too many factors and too many things at play. And we're just never going to know. And then I'm like, we'll fall down a rabbit hole a few weeks later
Yep.
again. Yeah, again, like I'm like, and then you bring in like the idea of the gut biome, right? And then you think about like all of these revelations they're having about
Yes.
hormones that are
Yes.
created in the
Yes.
gut now. And I'm like, oh, come on. Like, why is it so complicated?
Yeah, that's kind of my goal with the content that I'm going to be putting out, because I've recently I actually just did last week, or a week or two ago, I did the paperwork. I'm going to be an official LLC for What in ADHD. So like I'm going to do this full time. And wait, pause. Wait, what were we talking about right before that? I got sidetracked.
We were talking about kind of, the overwhelming amount of information out there.
Yes. Okay, so that's what I want to do with my content. Is there's information on this website about X, there's information on this blog about Y, there's information on this video about Z, and I want to combine all of them into like a basic, simple, just chunk of information, so that people don't have to like look up different things, because I know how that goes. You're like, okay, well, I read something about this here, but then you get distracted on the way over when you go to Google and you see your recent searches, and it's a mess. But I want to combine all of that for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that. I think it was in your about section on your website where you were saying like, that you're aware of how inaccessible so much of this language can feel to so many
Mm-hmm.
of us if we don't have the proper background that led us to that point. Like I think
Right.
there's moments in time where things land very differently based on how much other information you have at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I love the fact that, anyone who can bring in a level of expertise in terms of making this information more palatable is fantastic. And I think also goes back to that, like that advocacy piece, which is like how empathetic you feel toward
Mm-hmm.
others who have been struggling and had no idea that it could be this.
Right.
Now, speaking of the inaccessibility of language, what would you rename ADHD to something else? Do you feel like it's a problematic acronym, or do you feel like
I
knowing what you know now that it's actually pretty accurate?
I do. I don't like the name for several reasons, but like a big part of it is, there's the three subtypes of ADHD. There's predominantly inattentive, hyperactive impulsive, and there's combined type. But now, they did away with ADD, and they're like, okay, well, you have ADHD. And people think, well, I'm not hyperactive.
Mhm.
And while I have gone into, depths explaining that you can be internally hyperactive instead of physically hyperactive, people still don't like that word. And it's not an attention deficit. Also, like, we have too much attention, we just can't regulate it. So
Right.
I feel like it should be named something along the lines of like attention dysregulation syndrome, or something like, we have all the attention, we just don't have the dopamine to regulate where the attention needs to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the term disorder, I think, can be a barrier for a lot of people too. I think it kind of medicalizes what I'm starting to think more. I feel like for me personally, it's far more um, I, it's easier for me to think about ADHD as in terms of like a neurotype, a brain that you're born with,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it
Mm-hmm.
sort of dictates how you move through the world. And so again, like I think calling it a disorder really feels like it does it a disservice, because then you're kind of thinking of it in terms of like a medical diagnosis. Like I remember, like, even when I came out and said I was diagnosed with ADHD, there were so many people in my life who were like, I'm so sorry, as though I had come out and said I had cancer. And I was like, no, actually, this is the greatest thing that's ever
Exactly.
happened to
Yeah.
me. This explains so much, and it's so revelatory. And I think that there's ways in which it's presented as this like horrible thing that needs to be tamed and cured through the medication. You're like, no, that's not how it is at all. Never
Mhm.
mind. You know what? Just forget it. I'm just not going to talk to you about it anymore.
Right, right.
And so it's that feeling of like, there's just so much about the acronym and I think the diagnosis journey that misrepresents what it is and what people are experiencing, and then also how to live with it and how to quote unquote treat it. Even
Yes.
treating it, I feel like I need to put quotation marks around it, because again, it's like, it's mostly like, how can I lean into my strengths and set myself up for success. It's not necessarily like, what are the ways in which I'm going to cure myself of this.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes I feel like it's unfair to ask that question, because I certainly don't have the answer to that question. But I'm also just like endlessly seeking, like, maybe there's going to be something, because I don't necessarily feel like vast is a great alternative, and
Yeah,
it's
I don't
also
like the
impossible to
word.
Google.
Yeah, I don't like the word trait, because it's not a
Mhm.
trait. It's a whole collection of traits and behaviors and habits. And I liked what you said about neurotype. But I still feel like, while I don't like the word disorder, I feel like it still needs to be associated with, for some people, it can be a disability,
Mhm.
and we want to make sure that if it does change in the future, we want to make sure that we keep that in there, because some people really benefit from the accommodations that they have for their ADHD. And if we were to take away that aspect of it, they might take away the aspect of helping us too.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think, yeah, there needs to be some element to the seriousness of the I guess the disorder, where it's like, there has to be a way to kind of um uh I guess protect against that mentality of like, oh, it's overdiagnosed, or everyone's a little
Hmm.
ADHD, or that ADHD is sort of like a flightiness, that there is some real struggle and some real hurt, and help is required. And yeah, no, it's true. I don't know.
We don't know. That's why we are who we are. We don't
Right,
know.
but I will not rest until I find the answers.
Exactly.
So congratulations on doing this full time. That's super exciting,
Hmm.
and I'm sure a very interesting journey too. So we've talked a bit about what in the ADHD. Like, how do you describe it to people? And also, I wanted to ask you about the surveys on Twitter. Are you doing anything with that information? Are
Oh,
you creating a database, or what's going on with that?
yeah. So the surveys are it started with, I know I've referenced this a lot, but I actually got a lot out of what I tried to do with advocacy for when I had my first miscarriage. I was going to create an NPO for that. Long story short, the board members couldn't because they had a lot going on with their life. So I just donated all that money to another charity. But I did surveys with that. And I learned that people like to, talk about their experiences, especially anonymously. So I was like, So I tweeted one day, I'm like, hey, would you guys like if I just did surveys? And at first I would cap it at 100 because I didn't know how sheets worked, but now I know how to like actually filter things, and it's fun. But what I do with the surveys is I pick a topic, and it's actually very difficult coming up with, questions and options for those questions, and making sure all of those questions would actually put out useful and interesting information as a whole. And then what I'm doing with them now is it takes a long time to analyze them, but once I do, I make charts, and I'm slowly putting them. I have my personality types, and I started working on comorbidities yesterday, and I put them all on my website. So there's a tab on my website that says surveys and stats. You click on it, and then you can pick any of the topics and then view and read about what the results were. And then my brand as a whole, I just I want to do two things with two different communities. With the ADHD community, I want to, help everyone see that they're not alone. That is my big motto for the ADHD community. You're not alone. What you're dealing with is very common. I know the neurotypicals in your life may roll their eyes at you, may say that you're not XYZ, may say that you're lazy, may say that you don't have ADHD, but I want to open up a community. And I feel like I'm doing pretty well with that so far, where people see that what they're dealing with is common for us, not neurotypicals, but for us. And for the neurotypicals, I want to, show them, we're not just OMG squirrel. Like, that's not what ADHD is. We struggle with different things. We struggle with time management, with starting tasks, with continuing tasks, with motivation. With the ADHD paralysis, we want to do things, but we cannot start the task. So I want to educate the neurotypicals. And I try to do that by making all of my information accessible and fun, like try to hold everyone's attention. And I want to make everybody in my community feel like they're seen, they're heard, they're valid, and they're not alone.
Oh, I love it. Well, you're doing a fantastic job, and I love your videos. Where would you suggest somebody start out at whatinthe Like, because
Yeah,
I will link to your website, but I also want to link to your Twitter and your YouTube. Is
yeah.
there
I
a
have
central?
so I'm not doing Twitch streams anymore for now. But I have my website might be a good place to start to get different types of information, because I have blogs up there, and then there's links to all my other information up there. But definitely also my YouTube. I'm so close to being able to monetize on YouTube. I have over 2,000 subscribers, and I'm a couple hundred watch hours away from being able to monetize. Which, I'm not all about the money, but that will definitely help me to continue doing this full time.
Mhm.
If I'm making
Yeah.
money doing it, then I can keep doing it. So for sure.
Um, yeah, same. I hope people I'm starting to put commercials on my podcast, and I'm like, I hope people are fairly gracious about that stuff
Yeah, hopefully they understand,
because
everyone has to make money too. There's some people that don't think that people like me and you deserve compensation. Like, we're just entertainment. And, I really also, I'm candid with it too. I'm like, I've spent a lot of my own money on equipment and everything. Like, you have a nice microphone there. I'm sure that wasn't cheap. So
yeah,
yeah,
right.
we want to try, like, we want to help, but also, like, it doesn't hurt to at least break even with what we're putting into it.
Yeah, I think we also just I think it's a very ADHD um personality type to fall prey to that idea of like, I would do this for free if I could, like I think it is really difficult, especially it is for me personally. Like, it's really difficult to kind of justify that idea of like, no, I deserve to make money off of
Yeah,
this.
exactly. That took me a while.
And yeah, and be comfortable with that. I think
Hmm.
one thing I struggle with right now is the fact that like I really dislike self promotion. It's very
Yeah.
uncomfortable for me. And so like I know that there is that level of it. And I watch other people who like not shamelessly, but who just like feverishly self promote. And I'm just like, I cannot do that. I don't, I mean, I do the thing and then I put it out there and I just sort of hope for the best that people will find it. Right.
Yeah.
And like I know that life doesn't work that way. And it would be a lot easier if I could figure out ways to be savvier about that. But I think at the end of the day, I'm just like, look, there's only so much you can be good at. And like I don't know, I really struggle with that part. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable for sure.
Okay, cool. So I will put a link to your website. And now in terms of the surveys, are there times of the day or week that you can look forward? Like, how do you know what's coming so that you can take part in them? Because I feel like a lot of the
So
time they're over.
I do have a schedule that people can go to. It's a Google schedule. I have a link on my website, and they can click on it. They can incorporate it into their own schedule and get notifications for it or not. But usually I try to put them out on Fridays, and then they stay open until Tuesdays, I believe.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah, I saw the calendar, the Google Calendar. So you put those out there on that too. Oh, awesome. Okay.
I'm
Good
trying
to
my
know.
best to stick to it. Like there's been a couple times where I like looked at it, I'm like, oh wait, I didn't do that. And then I had to like hide it from public view. ADHD and learning a new routine. So I will get there eventually.
Oh my goodness. Don't even get me started on all of the like barriers to entrepreneurialism.
Yeah, it's
That's a
it's
whole
not
other,
easy.
right? I know. Maybe I'll have you back for another another
Another talk
hour.
about entrepreneur and ADHD ism.
I know, right? And yet I can't work for anyone else because I am who I am.
Exactly.
Well, it's been so lovely. I've been really looking forward to getting to meet you and chat with you. And I love what you are doing and putting out there for the ADHD community. And you do it with such humor, and you're so likable. And so thank you for everything you're doing.
Thank you for having me on and for doing what you're doing.